Chapter 14. I cannot imagine how difficult this past week has been for you, and I hold no blame on you if we made a wrong turn. Memorizing the corridors of this labyrinth would be a difficult feat, even in ideal circumstances. That said, are you certain we are traveling in the correct direction? Positive. From the cell, it's 3 lefts, 2 rights, down a long hall for 7 damn minutes, then 1 more left. We've been walking down this hall for almost 5 minutes, so we should be getting close. Hubert frowned skeptically at his newly rescued companion as they made their way through winding tunnels of the fortress. Sylvain limped at Hubert's side with pained, fatigued steps, one arm looped over Ingrid's shoulders as he leaned heavily against the Falcon Knight. With his free hand, he uncorked and guzzled down the contents of a second vulnerary, face grimacing with distaste as he tossed the empty bottle aside. The small group crept down the seemingly never-ending corridor with slow, cautious steps, every movement tentative, fearful that even the slightest misstep, the smallest particle nudged out of place, could unleash a horde of the fiends. So far, they had encountered few obstacles as they delved deeper into the fortress. 2 small groups of acolytes had attempted to ambush them earlier, the wretches laying in wait, just out of sight on the other side of a corner. The threat had been spotted and disposed of swiftly, the 3 Vestra siblings cutting through their enemies in a rush of dark magic, arrows, thrown knives, and a lightning-enchanted axe blade, while Ingrid hovered at the back of the group with Sylvain clinging to her. No further traps had been encountered, nor any ambushes attempted, once they made their way down the long hallway, just the branches of neon lighting embedded into the walls that buzzed down at them with a mocking hum. A winding, circuitous loop of icy tunnels and shrill glowing, the rescue party exploring the hollowed-out innards of a metallic, serpentine beast. Hubert's gut nodded with unease, his eyes darting to every shadow and flickering irregularity of the lighting in search of another trap to be sprung, or an enemy lurking out of sight. The fiends had been attacked and infiltrated, their hive thoroughly kicked, and a few wasps had descended upon them in retribution. Hubert did not doubt that the rest of the swarm lay in wait further inside. After a couple more minutes of walking, a sharp glow of dizzying cyan washed over the shadowy corridor from an adjoining room, a blazing signal flare drawing them to their destination. "Ha! There it is!" Sylvain lifted his head and grimaced with a pained grin. "Just like I said." "Well, color me impressed," Matilda smirked as she walked at Hubert's right, tiny sparks of cobalt blue dancing along the sharp edge of the bolt-axe, held tightly in her grasp. Theodore walked at her other side and nodded in agreement as she continued. "We had to etch scratches into the walls every time we encountered a split hallway, just to determine which areas have already been searched." "I must agree," Hubert smiled. "Memorizing the correct route through this labyrinth is no easy task, let alone while under duress. Well, it was either track my steps every time I was hauled out of the cell, or lose my damn mind." Sylvain gritted, as more ripples of pain washed over his face. He clutched his side, palm pressed against his ribs, the bones likely bruised or cracked. "You okay? Do you need a moment to rest?" Ingrid asked, her face tense and furrowed with worry. "Nah, I can't risk staying in one place for too long." Sylvain gritted as he resumed his shambling. "Besides, rescue mission's not over yet, right?" Hubert's gaze flicked back to the paladin, his mouth curling down into another frown as his eyes raked over his companion's array of bruises, cuts, and other injuries. "Do you require another vulnerary? We still have more we can spare." "I'll be fine," Sylvain hissed through his clenched teeth. "Save them for Ferdinand. He may need them." At Sylvain's words, the claws that had been scratching at the insides of Hubert's chest carved deep gouges into the soft organ battering against his ribcage. There was no telling what shape Ferdinand would be in once he was located. He could be perfectly fine, with only a handful of scratches or bruises that needed tending. Or he could be bleeding out at that very moment, lipped limb from limb by a pack of monsters, the light dimming from his eyes as he waited for help that would not arrive in time. Or perhaps Sylvain was wrong, and Ferdinand was in a completely different part of the fortress, being subjected to horrific experimentation that would strip away his vitality and hollow out his mind. Or maybe the wretches sought to prepare him as their next puppet, peeling away his skin like strips of bark while he shrieked in agonized terror, the flesh stitched together in a gruesome vestment, and that Hubert would find nothing but his doppelganger, grinning at him with a twisted mockery of Ferdinand's radiant smile. Hubert swallowed heavily, and pushed away the macabre thoughts with an internal growl. He gnashed his teeth, and forced himself to ignore the clammy chill crawling along his skin, and the lumps of sand sitting heavy in his lungs and rattling his breath. He would do Ferdinand no good if he collapsed into a panicked mess. They were in the fortress, and about to be reunited with their companions. Ferdinand would be rescued shortly. He was sure of it. And yet, the nightmarish hypothetical refused to remain buried, haunting images that pulsed and vibrated against the dark recesses of his mind, like a sand-crawler thrumming just beneath the earth and threatening to burst into the surface. Another whimper sounded from Sylvain. The paladin nearly doubled over, his eyes screwed shut, and clutching his ribs, every hitch of breath causing a shudder of pain. Hubert regarded his companion with a worried frown. The Vulinaries had been proficient at diminishing and even eliminating the smaller cuts and bruises that littered Sylvain's body. However, many wounds still remained, the cracked ribs being one of the greatest concern. Linhart would have to take a look at him, which made lowering the base's defenses and activating the teleportation gate all the more vital. As they approached the entrance to the adjoining room bathed in cyan, Hubert slid to the front of the group, his tome open and ready, and his back pressed against the cold wall as he slithered closer to the eerie glow. The others trailed several paces behind, readying their own weapons. A low hum of muttering voices could be heard inside the room. Carefully, Hubert peered around the corner, eyes narrowed against the harsh glare of lighting, stabbing at his retinas, and assessed what was inside. As Sylvain had described, the room was covered wall to wall with various glowing apparatuses, each piece a technological marvel of flashing glyphs and metalwork beyond anything Hubert had ever encountered before. The devices formed a web of black onyx around the room, all of the machines cross-hatched with shrill neon and descending in hexagonal rows and closed in on a sizable dais at the center, a single room from an ancient civilization, frozen in time and brought to life before his very eyes. A low, tinnitus hum vibrated from the devices and filled the air with a muffled buzz that scratched at Hubert's eardrums. The controls for the anti-warp field and the teleportation gate had to be in that room. Unfortunately, yet without surprise, the mechanisms were not left unguarded. 4 of Velus's acolytes flitted about the room, garbed in dark robes, and the neon lighting shimmering off their beaked masks in rays of eerie blue. 2 of the fiends were conversing on a platform bracketed by strange glowing devices at the far end of the room. Another was crouched on the ground and inspecting the dais at the center of the room, and the 4th was leisurely wandering between apparatus, poking at the glyphs, then moving on to the next device with a small nod. Hubert ducked back into the shadows and used a series of hand gestures to silently inform his companions about the fiends lying in wait and how to best dispose of them swiftly. The 4 nodded to him and prepared their weapons. Hubert and Theodore moved first, each brother flanking the sides of the doorway, Hubert with his tome open and ready, and Theodore with an arrow nocked in his bow. With a nod, the 2 ducked into the room and took cover behind a metal panel embedded with flashing glyphs. Waiting a second to ensure they were not spotted, Hubert and Theodore leaned around the panel and fired their attacks at the 2 dark mages conversing in the back. The Mire spell and arrow hit their marks, both fiends collapsing to the ground, one shrieking and futilely trying to scrape off the sloths of acid that burned through the front of their robes and chewed through their ribs beneath. The other flopped backwards, instantly killed from the arrow protruding from their left eye. The other 2 wretches squawked and whirled at the attack, scrambling for their own tomes and hastily cobbling incantations together. Matilda and Ingrid charged into the room with their weapons drawn. A single, lightning-infused swing of Matilda's axe decapitated the dark mage inspecting the dais, while the second fiend found themselves impaled on Lune. Once the room was cleared, Sylvain shambled inside. The paladin leaned heavily against the machinery lining the walls as he stumbled towards his companions. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his face scrunched with pain with every shuffled step. Hubert strode towards him, looped one of Sylvain's arms over his shoulders, and helped him limp towards the others. The mage frowned, as his eyes darted between 6 different hallways, branching from the control room, each one blanketed in a troubling hush. Sylvain, does the activity from the wretches who use the space seem unusually quiet? Yeah, it does. Sylvain frowned. The haggard lines in his face became more pronounced as his gaze combed over the control panel and the 4 dead bodies with steadily growing discontentment. Normally, this place would be buzzing with twice as many of these freaks. You think this could be a trap? Ingrid gulped as she moved to join them, face pale and her worried eyes bouncing between the 2 men. That they're waiting for the others to arrive before launching an ambush? Most definitely. But we have little choice. We cannot risk venturing further into this fortress without the assistance of our companions. Hubert grimaced. Everyone, fan out, and search the entire room. We need to find the device that can deactivate the anti-warp fields surrounding the space, as well as the controls for the teleportation gate. What about this one? Theodore suggested, waving Hubert over to the panel that was curved around the same platform that carried the bodies of the 2 dark mages the brothers had felled. Sylvain shuffled back to Ingrid, leaning heavily against the Falcon Knight, while Hubert dashed over to Theodore. He hummed as he examined the device, carefully running his gloved fingers along the cool metal. The panel appeared to be similar to many of the other ones lining the room, in spiraling, metallic threads, waist-high, with an elaborate collection of sigils flaring along its surface. At the back of the panel, a window-like panel protruded from the device, iridescent swells of magic energy, magnetic jewel-tone hues that swirled together and shimmered off the glass like sunlight refracting through a morning dewdrop. Charged waves pulsed along the energy field in a gentle tide of glimmering ripples. The energy field appeared near identical to the one Hubert and Shamir had spotted surrounding the mountain. Well spotted. Hubert smiled at his brother. The 2 worked together, tracing and poking at the glyph sigils, until one by one each symbol went dim. The remainder of the group hovered nearby, watching with curious eyes. A slight shift in the air thrummed along Hubert's skin as the glyphs went dark, subtle, like the sticky press of humidity against clammy flesh in the immediate aftermath of a storm. Magic that had been vibrating through the air with near imperceptible faintness now smothered, the corridors of the base stale and listless. I don't know what you did, but something definitely changed, Sylvain commented, as Theodore and Matilda nodded in agreement. Think that did the trick? We'll have to wait and see. Hubert hummed, as he stepped away from the panel. The next obstacle was the teleportation gate. Although one trained in faith magic, such as Linhart, could theoretically warp inside with the protective field disabled, the spell was only efficient if the caster can picture the location in their mind. With no idea as to what lay inside the mountain fortress, the others would have to wait for the teleportation gate to activate before being ushered inside. It did not take long to find the device in question. All the machines in the room converged to a central point, with a notable dais etched with very familiar markings. These glyphs matched those carved into the hidden metal dais just outside their base, Hubert noted, as his gloved fingertips traced over the etched patterns of the familiar sigils. This must be the controls to the teleportation gate. Well then, best not keep our companions waiting. I know Edelgard at the very least will have your head on a platter if you dare march into whatever death trap these thieves have planned without her, Matilda teased. Without a doubt. Hubert smirked with a light chuckle. Just as I am certain that you would not hesitate to alert her of such a misstep, should I dare to undertake such an endeavor. Well, someone needs to make sure your head doesn't get needlessly lopped off. She crossed her arms and huffed. Hubert chuckled and shook his head at her familiar pout, one that he had witnessed many times when teasing her as children. He leaned down, lips pressed into a thin line, as he regarded the wide diameter of the dais and the patterns of sigils carved into the outside border. This will likely go faster with a second set of hands. Matilda, if you would not mind," requested Hubert. His sister grinned in response, leaning her bolt-axe against the console behind her and crouching down to the other side of the dais, opposite Hubert. She peeled off her gauntlet and began tracing her half of the sigils with her fingertips. The two siblings worked as a team, shuffling around the circle and activating the glyphs. Each one blazed to life under their fingers, radiant hieroglyphics of starlight cutting through gloomy dim that enveloped them. "Almost there," Matilda grinned, as her fingertips glided along the swirling loop of her last sigil. Hubert hummed and nodded in agreement. His eyes narrowed and remained focused on the glowing symbols, his own fingers tracing along the final mark of the dais. The last glyph surged to life in a radiant corona of light that seared Hubert's eyes. Both he and Matilda raised a hand to their face to shield themselves from the blinding rays. Blazing threads of neon blue, incandescent and translucent like sunlight, captured in a diamond, rose from the glyphs and braided together in a pillar of pulsing lights. Sylvain shuffled forward, leaning on a nearby console for support, as he stared at the wall of light with a bright grin. "Not bad, Hubie," he cheered with an enthusiastic clap to Hubert's shoulder. "And you too, of course, Matilda," he added hastily, with a small bow of his head. Sylvain turned his attention back to the pillar of light, tilting his head to the side and examining the shimmering gate with a questioning frown. "Okay, so how long before—" Sylvain's question was cut off as the light pulsed brighter for a moment, a staticky hum thrumming through the air, accompanying the flash of light. Suddenly, a head of long navy locks poked through the portal, as a familiar figure emerged from the glowing pillar in a vibrant flash of cyan. The swordsmaster stepped into the base, a hand at the hilt of his blade, his eyes narrowed and scanning the room. The dour look on his face brightened as his gaze landed on Sylvain. "Fee!" Sylvain cried. A beaming smile lit his face, near delirious with joy. He shuffled towards the swordsmaster with a lilting gait. Seconds later, Shamir emerged from the wall of lights, stepping nimbly into the control room with her bow nocked and a readied arrow. She fired an icy scowl at Felix. "You were supposed to wait until we tested the portal," she scolded. "You're lucky this wasn't some sort of trap. Otherwise you would have been incinerated and reduced to ash for walking into an unknown energy field. Look, if you want to waste time throwing sticks at a bunch of lights while our comrades are in danger, then be my guest." He snipped back. Felix turned to Sylvain with a wry smirk. "Well, aren't you a sight for sore eyes?" He huffed. His eyes were softened with warmth. He stepped forward and wrapped Sylvain in a tight embrace. "Oh, shit! After all those times I annoyed the crap out of you by skipping out on training, I almost thought you'd be happy to get rid of me." Sylvain laughed, a tiny sob hitching his words. "And you finally gave me that hug you mentioned. Don't make me regret it. And besides, I put up with you this long. Life would be boring without your nonsense." Felix chuckled warmly, tightening his hold around the paladin. "Oh, you do love me." Sylvain chuckled, burying his face into Felix's shoulder, tremors rippling along his quaking shoulders as the two men remained locked in an embrace. "You smell terrible." "I love you too, Fee." After a moment, the two Fargans finally separated, with a chuckle and a warm clap to the shoulder, both men blinking away the water gathering in their eyes. The portal hummed and shimmered once again as more familiar faces emerged from the wall of lights. Caspar was the next to arrive. He charged through the portal with his silver axe raised high, bellowing a mighty battle cry. His shout stuttered to an awkward halt once he realized no enemies surrounded them, and caught the sight of Hubert watching him with an amused smirk. With a flush of embarrassment, Caspar lowered his weapon and scratched the back of his neck with a weak chuckle. Linhardt emerged from the portal next, followed closely by Bernadetta. Immediately, Linhardt's eyes widened and sparkled with wonder as he took in the nest of machines surrounding him. Bernadetta tiptoed behind him, significantly less enthralled by her surroundings, and eyeing every humming device as if it were a venomous snake waiting to snap at her hand. "Amazing," Linhardt breathed, his eyes glittering with hypnotized awe as he drank in the sight of every glowing sigil and intricately crafted magical device. This metalwork, the mana thrumming from these devices, It's leagues beyond any magical apparatus crafted within Fodland. I don't even think more Fisi inventions have come close to this type of technological wonder. You can admire the technological wonders all you want later, Linhart. Right now there are injured who need tending. Hubert cut in tersely, with a sharp nod towards Sylvain, who was still clutching his ribs, and hanging on to both Felix and Ingrid for balance. Yes, of course, the healer muttered absently, as he shuffled towards the wounded paladin, most of his attention still clearly fixated on the cornucopia of glowing devices humming around him. Lady Edelgard and the professor were the last to walk through the portal, both with their respective weapons drawn, the neon lights casting a greenish tint on Edelgard's golden heavy armor. She smiled when her gaze met Hubert, and immediately rushed forward to join him. "Good. It looks like everyone made it through." Edelgard nodded. "I'm glad to see you all made it here safely, and that you managed to locate Sylvain, too. It's good to see you alive and well, General Gautier." "Glad to finally see under this hellhole, Your Majesty," Sylvain chuckled, with a pained smile, his face scrunched uncomfortably as Linhart's healing magic poured over his wounds, sealing the lacerations closed, and knitting together his cracked ribs. Linhart hissed a sharp reprimand at him to remain still every time the paladin flinched. "How fares our decoy team?" Hubert asked. "Any word from Petra and the others?" "Petra and Constance have eliminated all of the turrets, and are keeping watch from the skies," Edelgard explained. Her countenance dimmed, as eyes roved over everyone in the room, noting the distinct absence of their other captured general. "All that remains is to locate and rescue Ferdinand." "How much opposition have you faced in the base so far?" the professor inquired, as she joined Edelgard's side with the sword of the Creator in hand. "Far too little," Hubert answered grimly, his eyes darting around the room once more, taking in the familiar shadows and hidden crevices. Still no changes, still no sign of the enemy, but he knew they were there, waiting just out of sight, worms wiggling just beneath a rotting plank of wood and feasting on the decay. They would emerge eventually. "I see." She frowned, her voice nearly devoid of inflection, but an eerie intensity flickering in the depths of her stare, eyes somehow simultaneously blank and piercing. She flicked her gaze to Edelgard. "We should prepare a defensive line around this room. We can't afford to lose access to the teleportation gate." At that moment, explosions of crimson flashed around the room, blocking every exit. The red mist dispersed, leaving cloaked, hooded figures in their wake. Those who slither in the dark, Thalas's acolytes, at least 20 of them, warping at the entrance to every corridor that surrounded the control room, and creeping forward, spiders descending upon helpless flies snared in their web. "Oh, no, not now!" Bernadetta whimpered, backing away from the cloaked figures and scrabbling for an arrow from her quiver. Her fingers wrapped around an arrow, quickly knocking it into her bow and firing at the nearest dark mage. The fiend went down with a gurgled shriek as it struck him in the lung. Sulphur hung thick and noxious in the room, strong enough to burn Hubert's nostrils and sear the back of his throat, as dark magic spells swirled to life. A chittering chorus of incantations rang about like the buzzing of a horde of locusts. It was as Hubert feared. The trap had been sprung, and the rescue party were now cornered prey, boxed into the control room, with the teleportation gate as their only escape. If they dared to flee, there was no doubt it would be resealed once more, and Ferdinand would likely be lost to them forever. Hubert snarled, tome in hand, and his own dark magic springing to life. Around him, the rest of his companions readied their weapons and braced themselves. Unsurprisingly, Caspar was the first one to leap into the fray. He charged at the closest group of dark mages with his axe raised and the roar of a mighty battle cry. From behind him, Linhart launched a volley of wind magic at the fiends. Gusts of wind swirled together and fused into emerald blades that sliced into the dark mages, disrupting their casting and providing Caspar with an opening to strike. Dark magic exploded through the room as the first torrent of spells were unleashed by the fiends. Thick clouds of miasma spiraled through the room, forcing most of the rescue party to dive behind the devices to evade the assault. Bernadetta, Shamir, and Theodore all took cover behind different consoles scattered around the room, poking out of cover and firing arrows at the enemy between barrages of dark magic. "Hubert, head out and find Ferdinand. The rest of us will deal with the mages," the professor barked. The sword of the creator glowed as it surged to life, each sharpened vertebrae of the weapon blazing like a stoked ember. Hubert snapped his tome shut and snuffed out the spell. He turned sharply to the paladin standing at his side. "Sylvain!" he barked. "The arena where you and Ferdinand were often taken. Where is it?" "Over that way." Sylvain nodded towards a tunnel at the far end of the control room, one blocked by two more beak-masked fiends. "It's about 2 halls down, not far from here." "Ingrid, go with Sylvain and Hubert to find Ferdinand. I'll take care of things here," Felix barked as he drew his sword. His eyes tracked the movements of one particular fiend who was skulking behind some of the consoles and attempting to ambush the group from behind. "Got it," Ingrid hollowed back as she readied Loon. "Keep him safe. We just got the big lug back," Felix said with a tiny smirk. "Oh, I have the greatest friends," Sylvain chuckled as he jogged alongside Ingrid as they made their way towards the next corridor. "In that case, let's be off. We don't have a moment to spare," Edelgard stated as she hoisted her great shield and axe. She began to follow after the 2 Fargan knights. "Lady Edelgard?" Hubert blinked with surprise. "I'm going with you, of course," she stated firmly, lilac eyes blazing. "And don't even think about trying to suggest that it's too dangerous to accompany you and that I would be safer with the others. Ferdinand is my friend too, and I will not sit idly by while he is held captive by these monsters." "Of course, Lady Edelgard," Hubert said with a warm chuckle. "We are happy to have you with us. I suspect we will greatly need your might for what lies ahead." "Hubert, wait!" Matilda called out after Hubert as he turned to leave. She reached into her pocket and thrust out her hand. Hubert's eyes widened as he caught sight of one of their mother's Morphisi warp gems sitting in the center of her palm. "Take it," she ordered. "We're right next to the gate, so you'll probably need this thing more than I do." "You didn't steal this from Mother, did you?" Hubert smirked and raised a quizzical eyebrow. "Do I appear to possess a death wish? She gave them to me, in case of an emergency," she huffed. "Now take the blasted thing and get moving." Hubert snatched the warp gem from Matilda's hand and placed it in his pocket. Tension pinched at his temples, and his face crinkled with unease as his gaze flicked between his sister, his brother, and the battle surrounding them. "Be safe, and do not take any unnecessary risks. Both of you," he added sharply with a nod towards Theodore, who was readying a fresh arrow. "We know," Matilda smiled. "Now go!" Hubert nodded, and quickly joined Sylvain, Ingrid, and Edelgard, the 4 of them jogging towards the corridor Sylvain had pointed to. The way remained blocked by 2 of the acolytes standing in their path. Sulphur burned at Hubert's nose, and dark magic energy crawled along Hubert's skin, like static as the fiends prepared to attack. 2 separate arrows took down the dark mages standing in their path. Hubert looked over his shoulder to see Theodore and Shamir with their freshly fired bows in hand. "Keep moving," Shamir ordered, as she and Theodore readied their next arrows. Hubert nodded and sprinted alongside the others, racing down the corridor ahead. The group had barely ran a handful of yards before another burst of crimson flashed before them, and 3 more of the fiends materialized in front of them, blocking the path. Hubert snarled at the new obstacle and began hissing the incantation for a miasma spell. Before he finished casting, Edelgard slung her shield onto her back and charged forward with her axe clutched in both hands. Amir flared a dark crimson that wrapped around the bone-carved blade and palpitated like the thudding heartbeat of a fearsome beast. She launched herself at the fiends with a burst of speed that should have been impossible for the amount of armor she was wearing. "Get out of our way!" she snarled, Amir swinging in a wide arc that nearly cleaved the first dark mage in half, before immediately rounding on the other 2 and cutting them down as well. The path cleared, the group continued on their way. They dashed through the halls, turning down an adjacent corridor at the far end as per Sylvain's instructions. The paladin hobbled and grunted as he ran, but with the worst of his injuries freshly healed, he managed to keep pace with the others. It was not long before they reached their destination, another room of glowing devices, with a large window at the far side. 2 more dark mages awaited them in the room. They turned to the group with squawks of confusion, only to be doused in a pool of mire launched by Hubert. With the threat eliminated, the group rushed into the room, Sylvain dashing forward to the large window and pointing through the glass. "Down there!" Sylvain shouted at Hubert. Hubert ran to the window and squinted through the glass. his eyes immediately widening as he took in the sight before him. The room they were currently in was some sort of observation deck that overlooked a massive arena below. The arena was a gargantuan structure, larger than any of the Tilliards that hosted jousting tourneys across Frodland, a colossal, circular room in the towering metal walls that swelled around the cavernous structure in a dome of cold onyx. Vast pillars of the same strange metal jutted through the arena, like the scorched rib cage of a long-dead beast. And in that arena was Ferdinand, facing off against the demonic beast with little more than a brittle lance. Terror settled into Hubert's chest, like a block of ice that coated his lungs and heart with frost, his breath frozen in his throat. The hulking beast, a twisted, foul creature of armored skin and jagged spines jutting from its back, towered over Ferdinand. The flimsy lance he wielded about as useful as trying to attack a battlement with a dried twig. Even from the observation deck, Hubert could see that Ferdinand was injured, based on the faint limp in his right leg every time he dove out of the way of the monster's sharp claws, and the way he favored his left arm when stabbing the beast with his lance. "We need to get down there now!" Hubert's orders were cut off by more bursts of crimson erupting around the room. 6 more of the cloaked fiends warped into the room. Their attackers sneered down their beaked masks, like a flock of malevolent vultures as dark magic sprung to life in their palms. "Damn it! Not now!" Hubert roared, as he ripped open his tome, nearly tearing out several pages in the process. Edelgard placed a firm hand on Hubert's shoulder and stepped forward with her great shield raised, inserting herself between Hubert and the dark mages. "Go to the arena and help Ferdinand," she ordered. "We'll take care of things here." Ingrid and Sylvain moved to flank Edelgard, their own lances readied. Hubert's eyes darted between his lady liege, facing off against the dark mages, at the window looking out over Ferdinand in the arena. His gut twisted into a nauseous tangle. "Your Majesty!" Hubert swallowed, as his eyes jumped back to the window, his heart nearly stopping as Ferdinand narrowly dodged the downward slam of the monster's claws. "I cannot abandon—" "Hubert, we've got this!" Sylvain looked over his shoulder and grinned. "Take the corridor on the left, and follow the ramp down to the arena. You can't miss it. Now get down there and save your shining knight. Ferdinand's counting on you." Hubert opened his mouth to protest, but remained silent, as his 3 companions fired scalding looks at him. He snapped his tome shut, grabbed the satchel of vulneraries and tonics that Ingrid was carrying, and dashed from the room without another word. Hubert sprinted through the corridors as instructed, bottles of medicine rattling in his satchel as he sped through the dark halls. As he rounded the corner, a barrage of dark spikes spiraled in his direction. Hubert rolled into the next corridor, narrowly dodging the projectiles. He hissed as one of the spikes grazed his left cheek, leaving a shallow gash. He grimaced at the sound of glass vials being smashed to pieces as another dark blade screeched by his hip. A light clink like a pebble bouncing along a stone floor nudged at his ears. The dark mage who attacked him lurked around the corner, blocking the ramp leading to the arena. Snarling, Hubert drew a throwing knife and launched it at his attacker, smirking with satisfaction when the blade hit its mark and pierced through the masked lens of the fiend, skewering their eye. The dark mage howled and clutched at the knife still stuck in their eye, shambling about in blinded agony. Hubert rushed forward with his dagger drawn and finished off the wretch with a stab to their guts. The fiend slumped to the ground and bled out in seconds. Sticky streams of fluid seeped against Hubert's coat. With a growl of dismay, he noticed that every one of the vulnerary and tonic bottles in the satchel had been smashed to pieces, a dark spike still protruding from the bag, and the spilled contents soaking through the rough burlap as well as the side of Hubert's coat. He let the bag of broken vials slide off his shoulder and slumped to the ground with a heavy sigh. His heart clenched, and a lump clogged his throat as the sight of the glass fragments swirled with spilled medicine. Hubert only hoped that Ferdinand was still well enough to make it to Linhart. With the way clear, Hubert sprinted down the ramp. Barbs wrapped around his aching muscles as he ran, his heart throbbing to the point it felt as if it would explode through his ribcage. He skidded to a halt, nearly collapsing with the sealed set of double doors blocking his entrance to the arena, a dim glowing panel of glyphs arranged in a circle, the last obstacle barring him from reuniting with his love. Heart thundered against his chest, and lightning scraping across his nerves. Hubert's fingers raked over the sigils in a blur as his mind screamed at him to hasten his movements. Faster! Damn it, faster! Finally, the glyphs blazed in a blinding halo as Hubert finished tracing the final sigil pattern, the door sliding open with a grating screech. Hubert nearly wept with joy as the path cleared before him. Without hesitation, Hubert dashed into the arena, tome in hand, and ready to launch a hurricane of dark magic at whoever dare lay a hand on Ferdinand. He caught sight of the other man at the other side of the arena, battling with an armored demonic beast. Hubert's breath hitched, and his heart fluttered at the breathtaking scene before him. Ferdinand danced in front of his eyes, ducking and swaying between the clawed stripes and snapping jaws of the demonic beast he squared off against. The mangled remnants of an iron lance were clutched tightly in his hand, half of the weapon broken clean off, and leaving little more than the sharpened spear end and a splintered shaft to hold on to. Some of the scales on the beast's head had already been chipped away, trails of black fluid seeping from the hacked patches of armored hide. Ferdinand launched himself at the monster with a ferocious roar, rolling out of range when the beast swiped at him with its claws, and stabbing up at the beast into the underside of its jaw. Copper hair was matted together in a greasy tangle and caked with grime, ringlets that usually glinted in the sunlight, hanging lank and drenched with sweat around his paled face. Bandages stained with the rusty hue of dried blood, like those found on Sylvain, were woven along Ferdinand's arms as well, his tunic tattered and speckled with fresh crimson and coated with dust. Ferdinand panted, nearly doubled over with fatigue, as he slid out of range and readied for his next strike. His mouth curled into a furious snarl, as fire blazed across his face, even on the verge of collapse, exhausted, but still deadly, and more beautiful than any sight Hubert had laid eyes on. Just as Hubert was finishing the final words to the incantation and preparing to launch an attack at the monster that harried Ferdinand, a cacophony of shrill roars screeched through the arena, the melody of a shrieking banshee wailing through a haunted shroud of mist. The fine hairs on Hubert's arms raised on end at the sound, a clammy chill settling in his flesh as his eyes darted around for the source of the nightmarish cry. Ferdinand startled and looked around at the sound, but was forced to redirect his attention to the demonic beast trying to swipe at his head. Two large panels on the wall parted, and a pair of winged monsters swooped into the arena, massive, draconic abominations of twisted flesh, kept afloat by the beating of their bat-like wings. Gold-plated masks, not dissimilar to those worn by the cloaked maggots infesting the base, adorned their grotesque faces. Each of them clung to a nearby pillar, talons denting the thick metal under their grasp. Another set of shrieks vibrated through the arena as they stretched their elongated necks and lifted their heads, blindly sniffing the air. Their heads quickly swiveled to Ferdinand, still occupied by the beast before him, and lifted from the pillars with an eerie chirp, their target spotted. Red flooded Hubert's vision. Dark spikes materialized around him in an explosion of violet before the words to the incantation had made its way past his lips, dark magic answering to his rage and bending to his command. Hundreds of razor stalactites, more than Hubert had ever been able to summon before, sprung into existence and hovered ominously around him, like the bladed feathers of an archangel's wings. With a furious roar, Hubert rained every single one of them down upon the demonic beasts that were closing in on Ferdinand. The dark spikes ripped through the beasts, as if their thick hides were little more than delicate silk. Shrieks rang out from the monsters, as the sharpened projectiles sliced through their leathery wings, pinning them to the ground. More spikes continued to pelt them, an endless cascade of blades stabbing into the squalling beasts as they flailed helplessly on the ground. The dark spikes smashed through their gold masks, skewering the skulls of the monster beneath. With a feeble flap of their tattered wings, the monsters eventually slumped to the ground, dead. Hubert dropped to his knee with a sharp gasp. Ragged gulps of air scratched through his lungs. His muscles reduced to thick clumps of sludge. He wiped the beads of perspiration from his brow, magic stinging across the veins in his hands, even with the use of a tome. Taking a deep breath, he staggered to his feet and searched the arena for Ferdinand. Ferdinand stabbed down one last time at the beast he had felled, the crest of Keyhole blazing to life as his broken lance shoved through the monster's now exposed head, carving through its skull as it howled one last time before collapsing into stillness. Grabbing hold of the splintered shaft, Ferdinand wrenched the lance free and whirled in Hubert's direction, weapon raised with a ferocious snarl. He froze, amber eyes wide at the sight of Hubert, bottom lip quivering, and a tiny whimper escaping his trembling mouth. He lowered his weapon, the mangled lance falling from his fingertips and clattering to the ground. Ferdinand took a halting step forward, as if not quite believing what he was seeing. Several things happened at once. Hubert found himself pulled towards Ferdinand, iron threads that had dug their hooks into his heart and drew him where he belonged. In a blink, Hubert was standing before Ferdinand, the other man close enough to touch, close enough to hold. He cupped Ferdinand's face and smashed their lips together into a searing kiss. Warmth erupted from Hubert's chest and flooded every inch of his body as he kissed Ferdinand. Even dried and chapped, Ferdinand's lips felt more luxurious than the finest of velvets, tasted more divine than even the most renowned of wines. The kiss was frenzied, feverish. Hubert knew his movements were clumsy and uncoordinated. A desperate press of lips, inexperienced and fumbling, but solidifying the reality of Ferdinand being alive and in his arms. For so many moons, Hubert had imagined what Ferdinand's lips would feel like against his. Imagined their softness, their taste, their warmth, the way Ferdinand's eyes would flutter, and a hum of delight would ripple through his body. All of the fantasies and dreams Hubert's mind had cobbled together paled in comparison to the divine reality of what kissing Ferdinand truly felt like. Eventually, they parted. Both gasped for air. Tingles continued to dance along Hubert's lips as they pulled away. He regarded Ferdinand with a shy smile, heat settling into his cheeks, and his heart fluttering in his chest like the wings of a butterfly. A nervous, fluttering response that stuttered to a halt as Ferdinand continued to stare at him, wide-eyed and unresponsive. It was now at a point a cold wave of horror sunk into Hubert's bones and turned the marrow into ice. Ferdinand had been imprisoned and tortured for a week. Before that, Ferdinand had stormed away from him, furious, and believing that the fake kidnapping to be some sort of cruel prank. It would be little surprise if Ferdinand still harbored some hatred for him. And the first thing Hubert had done was launch himself at Ferdinand like a mindless animal, heedless of the other man's feelings. His mind screamed at him for his crass overstep. "You blundering imbecile! Ferdinand," Hubert stammered. "I must apologize." Hubert's words were cut off as Ferdinand firmly grasped the sides of Hubert's face and pulled the mage into another heated kiss. Euphoria danced along Hubert's nerves like the electric currents of a Thoron spell. Ferdinand's touch was firm, quickly taking control of the kiss. Hubert melted against him. A pleased whine vibrated in Hubert's throat, and Ferdinand's tongue pushed past his lips and caressed the insides of his mouth. He keened as the paladin's rough fingertips carded through his hair, lightly tugging at the dark curls and pulling Hubert closer. This time, when they parted, Ferdinand stared at him with eyes that brimmed with tears, but also fondness and warmth. He reached up and tenderly brushed the swath of bangs hanging in front of Hubert's right eye. Hubert's eyelids fluttered at the touch, leaning into Ferdinand's palm with a contented purr. "You certainly took your time," Ferdinand teased with a weak smile. He wrapped his arms around Hubert's waist, his face leaning into the crook of Hubert's shoulder, his eyes fluttering shut. An embrace Hubert heartily returned. They stood there for a moment, just holding on to and basking in one another's warmth. Hubert's heart thudded in his chest. Immeasurable waves of joy sang through his body. Happiness he had not felt in some time, surging to a crescendo that left him nearly delirious with rhapsody. Ferdinand was really there, battered and on the brink of collapse, but alive and in his arms. After everything they had been through, all the missteps and blunders over the past couple months, they were finally together. Hubert's deeply guarded love for the other man reciprocated in a way he never dared dreamed. His heart full, completed with its other half. Hubert tightened his embrace, holding his love close and guarding him from all danger. "I knew you would find me," Ferdinand whispered, with a blissful sigh. "Always," Hubert breathed. He buried his nose into the matted copper curls and placed a kiss to Ferdinand's head, arms still wrapped around one another. "It's about damn time!" cheered a familiar voice that boomed all around them. Hubert jolted and whirled around. He kept his arms wrapped protectively around Ferdinand, the huff of the other man's breath tickling his neck as Ferdinand chuckled against him. Sylvain's voice seemed to echo from every direction in the arena, like a clap of thunder. Looking up, Hubert could faintly see Sylvain, Edelgard, and Ingrid waving down at them from the observation deck window. Sylvain gave the two of them a thumbs up. "How are we hearing you so clearly?" Hubert yelled up at them. Strangely, Ferdinand seemed unsurprised by the dismembered voice, and only looked up at the observation deck with an amused smile. "Oh, these freaks have a device they normally speak into that amplifies and projects their voice into the arena. Normally they would use it to sneer some ominous shit at us while they dumped a horde of monsters on our heads. I gotta say, this thing is pretty handy for communication, so long as the person using it isn't a giant asshole," Sylvain's booming voice explained. "They also have a device that amplifies what you two are saying and sends it back up, so I can hear you both loud and clear. Congrats on finally pulling your heads out of your asses and admitting how you both feel. I knew you could do it." Hubert groaned and buried his face in his hands. Surely this humiliation could not get any worse.
"Although I wouldn't quite word it the same way, I must echo Sylvain's sentiments,"
Edelgard added with a clear smile in her voice.
"The two of you have clearly been spitting with each other for some time, and it's nice to see you both finally being honest about your feelings you hold for one another. I am happy for the two of you. You both deserve to be loved and cherished." "Hey, look at that! Even got the Emperor's approval,"
Sylvain chimed.
"Not that it was ever in question, Your Majesty,"
he hastily added, likely after receiving a sharp glare from Edelgard. Nope, his humiliation could absolutely get worse. Hubert grumbled under his breath, the noise muffled by the hands his face was still buried in, as fire seared at his cheeks, and he silently begged the universe to let him melt through the cracks in the floor and disappear. Ferdinand gently coaxed him out of his scrunched posture by nuzzling against Hubert's cheek and pressing a kiss to his jaw.
"Come on, quit torturing the poor guys,"
Ingrid scolded.
"and give them a little privacy. They can barely breathe with you harping on them."
"Thank you, Ingrid," Ferdinand chuckled, the exhausted lines and crags less pronounced as his face filled with mirth. "It pleases me to know at least one other knight among our ranks is capable of showing decency towards a newly formed romantic couple."
"Hey, I wasn't gonna watch you guys canoodle. I'm not a creep,"
Sylvain squawked.
"Oh, flames no. You two could use a victory smooch with each other."
"I will not argue with you there," Ferdinand chuckled. A husky timbre curled the edges of his words, the smoky sound igniting a fresh bloom of flames across Hubert's face and stirring heat deep in his core. "All of you, try to remain focused on the task at hand," Hubert grumbled, in a strangled voice. "In case it escaped your attention, we are still in the heart of an enemy fortress. We still need to regroup with the others and make our escape."
"Quit being such a buzzkill! You finally got the man of your dreams! Celebrate a little! You earned it!"
A deep roar cut through the revelry, melting through the wispy tendrils of joy, like molten iron poured over a mound of snow. The sound thundered through the arena in a deafening howl, bellowed from the lungs of a beast that had to be colossal in size. Hubert's heart halted, the air ripped from his lungs. He could feel Ferdinand shudder against him, his own head swiveling around in search of the noise. Hubert's eyes went wide and scanned the perimeter of the arena, and his arms held Ferdinand tighter.
"What's going on? Where is that noise coming from?"
shouted Edelgard's voice. Grating screeches ripped through the room and shattered against Hubert's ears. He and Ferdinand whirled in the direction of the sound, a wave of cold horror slamming into them as a towering panel in the wall slid open, revealing another darkened chamber with something massive shuffling inside. Another rumbling growl vibrated through the room.
"Oh, shit! Abort the canoodling! Abort the canoodling! Something nasty is headed your way!
Sylvain screamed.
Get out of there! Now!
Hubert, this way! Ferdinand urged as he tugged at Hubert's arm and pulled him towards the entrance of the arena. The two men had barely made it a handful of yards across the cavernous room when the heavy doors slid shut with a loud screech. Hubert slammed his fist against the sealed exit with an enraged growl. He poked at the crevices, desperate for some kind of mechanism that would spring them open once more. A low growl sounded in his throat when none were unearthed. It was no use. The doors could not be opened from inside the arena. The cold metal remained still, an unmovable mountain, blocking their path to freedom.
Who closed the doors? I thought we had control over the arena!
Ingrid's panic shrieked over the chaos.
Well, this is certainly a surprise. So many crest bearers delivering themselves to our doorstep. And impeccable timing, too. We were almost finished with the bearer of Keyhole's crest. A shame. He was so interesting to watch, though the human form only has so much durability before it breaks. No matter. One last experiment before we dispose of him.
Chortled a new voice, the cackled words wrapped in sinister mirth. Rage boiled through Hubert's arteries, like the magma bubbles of a lava pit. He wrapped his arms tightly around Ferdinand, the exhausted paladin leaning against him and glaring up at the fiend who taunted them from above.
Damn! Over there!
Sylvain growled. Hubert could vaguely see the paladin pointing through the window to something across from him.
There's another observation deck at the other side of the arena. That beak-faced asshole must be operating the controls from there.
Hubert looked up to see where Sylvain was pointing. Sure enough, a cluster of dark-robed figures were flitting about in the opposite room, their beaked faces sneering down at them through the glass. In the center of the group was an acolyte dressed in ornate dark bishop attire, the leader of the pack, and the one who had so cavalierly discussed killing Ferdinand. Hubert's eyes narrowed at the target, vaguely recognizing him from assignments where he had been forced to work alongside the wretched maggots. Odysseus, one of Dallas's top lieutenants.
Such a splendid show this will be. I cannot wait to see how the other crest bearers fare the arena once they are captured.
Odysseus' voice cackled with warped delight.
I wonder, who should be thrown into the pit first? Daphne is already here, and with Loon in possession no less. Or perhaps the bearers of Setline and Index should be thrown into the fray first. Test how their saints' crests compare against those of Keyhole's. Then again, there is that bearer of the major crest of Freldarius. So many choices. Oh, what a spectacle it shall be!
You lay a single hand on any of them and I'll ram the arrow of interest so far up your...
Sylvain, I'll deal with them. You two defend this position and help Hubert and Ferdinand any way you can.
Edelgard ordered. The clank of her armored boots echoed through the amplifier as she sprinted from the observation deck. Not to worry. I have another way out. Hubert sighed as he reached into his pocket to retrieve the Morphisi warp gem Matilda had given him. His blood turned to ice. The air ripped from his lungs, when no gem touched his fingertips. Panic gripped Hubert's chest as he searched his coat again, hoping he had merely misplaced the object. His pocket was empty. The gem must have fallen out when he was attacked by the fiend who had ambushed him in the corridor. Another roar rumbled through the arena. Hubert and Ferdinand whirled around at the sound, both their faces paling at the sight before them. A gigantic demonic beast lumbered from the depths of the cavern that had been freshly unsealed, a hulking monstrosity the size of a building, and shambling on all fours as it crawled from its cage and entered the arena. Once clear of its pen, it reared back onto its hind legs and howled. Ferdinand and Hubert flattened themselves against the wall, hopelessly trying to blend in with the shadows.
Excellent! Excellent! Our finest show yet!
Odysseus squealed.
Now, bearer of Keyhole, I know you are at your breaking point, but do try to give a performance worth remembering. It would be a shame for the great General Ire to die pitifully and without a fight.
You will receive no such satisfaction from us, monster! Ferdinand snarled. "We will slay this beast, and we will be coming for your head next."
Good, good. Let that fiery determination fuel your dying gasps. It'll make your inevitable demise so much more delightful to witness.
Odysseus cheered, a chorus of shrill cackles from he and his acolytes, ricocheting through the arena. The colossal beast prowled forward, every clawed step rattling the metal panels lining the floor. Massive spiked gauntlets were strapped to its forelegs, a helm crafted of similar, heavy metal, adorning its head in a sharpened steel maw. Thick bandages stained with blackened sludge wrapped around the monstrosity, as if trying to seal the dark magic that oozed from its pores. The armor concealing its face blinded the creature from the front, but numerous eyes grew from its neck, protruding from the warped flesh like festering tumors, each one blinking and rotating in a different direction, an all-seeing predator searching for its prey. Its steel maw drifted towards the door, Hubert and Ferdinand spotted by its many eyes. An explosion quaked above them as loons smashed through the observation deck window. Shards of molten wrapped glass rained down upon the arena in a shower of burning knives, flames still licking the sharp fragments from Ingrid's attack.
"Hey, up here, you ugly freak!"
she snarled. Even from a distance, Hubert could see the fire orb surge to life in her hand, a sphere of coiled flames blazing to life and pouring forth into the arena in a scorching jet. The ribbon of flames crashed into the back of the monster's head. It spun around with an enraged roar. The monster charged towards the source of the flames, rearing back on its hind legs and snapping at the Falcon Knight. The observation deck was just out of reach of the snapping jaws. Ingrid continued to pour wave after wave of fire on the monster as it clawed and snapped at the air, shrieking with rage.
"Atta girl! Roast that big bastard!"
Sylvain cheered through the amplifier before turning his attention back to Hubert and Ferdinand.
"Both of you, take cover. We'll keep this mean son of a bitch distracted and try to get those doors open."
"This way," Hubert hissed. He looped Ferdinand's arm over his shoulder, wrapped an arm around the Holy Knight's waist, and helped him limp away. They shambled their way towards a cluster of pillars at the far end of the arena. Hubert looked over his shoulder, ensuring the beast was still preoccupied with futilely trying to lunge at the two Fargans perched out of reach.
"What do you mean she's already cut through 2 squads? Send more!"
Odysseus' voice squawked through the amplifier. Hubert smirked with satisfaction as he and Ferdinand limped for cover, knowing Lady Edelgard was tearing through the maggots' ranks as if they were little more than paper dolls. Flames poured out of the observation deck window. More fire magic chewed through the air, filling the room with the scent of charcoal, as Sylvain held out the arrow of Indra and cast Bolganone. A pillar of fire erupted from underneath the beast. The monster staggered back with a ferocious snarl. Fire clung to and burned through the bandages, revealing the scaled hide oozing with black sludge, the beast's head and tail whipping around the room as it shook away the ripples of flame flowed over its torso.
"See? Isn't that fire orb great?"
Sylvain chirped as he launched another fire spell.
"Am I genius or what? I'll admit, this thing is definitely useful."
Ingrid laughed as she continued to spray flames from the glowing sphere.
"I'm still not positive it won't blow up in my hand any second, but at the moment, this thing's pretty decent." "Decent? That orb could be a complete game changer for the war!"
At the other side of the arena, Hubert pulled Ferdinand back behind one of the far pillars. He pressed the other man against the steel surface, bracketing Ferdinand's body with his own. Had the situation been different, Hubert would have very much relished the feel of Ferdinand's body pressed against his, the hot tickle of Ferdinand's breath against his. Instead, the two were cornered by a nightmarish abomination, panting with exhaustion, and painted in a myriad of wounds that harried their every step. Hubert grimaced as he took in Ferdinand's appearance. The unhealthy pallor of his complexion, the hollowed circles ringing his eyes, the bruising and scratches along his arms and face, the way Ferdinand carefully avoided putting too much weight on his right arm and leg. Any tonics and vulneraries that could have aided Ferdinand had been smashed when he was ambushed. Hubert cursed himself for allowing such a thing to happen. He peered around the pillar to assess the situation. Dread sat in his stomach, like a mason block, as the cascades of fire did little more than annoy the beast. Blazing rivets slid harmlessly off the monster's thick hide, like beads of water, leaving not even a scorch mark in the armored plating concealing its head. Sylvain and Ingrid would eventually run out of fire magic. Hubert and Ferdinand would not be able to hide forever. "Ferdinand," Hubert said thickly, placing his arms on Ferdinand's shoulders and holding him close. "I need you to remain here while I dispose of that monster. Sylvain and Ingrid won't be able to keep it occupied forever, and there is no guarantee Lady Edelgard will be able to open the doors before that abomination rips the arena apart." "What? You cannot possibly be serious!" Ferdinand snapped, as his amber eyes blazed. "There is no possible way you will be able to slay that beast single-handedly." Ferdinand pushed himself away from the pillar, only to immediately collapse back against it with a pained grunt. A ghostly paleness leached the usual sun-kissed bronze from his freckled skin, making the bruises and scratches across his face stand out like violently bright rose petals. "You are in no shape to do any fighting, and I am afraid I do not possess any vulneraries or tonics that could revive your strength," Hubert said firmly, placing his hands on Ferdinand's shoulders and holding him against the pillar. "Charging the beast in your condition would be tantamount to suicide, and I will not allow you to throw your life away. Not now, not ever. You will remain here while I deal with that monstrosity." "I will do no such thing." "You will, and that's final."
I hate to break up your first lover's quarrel, but Hubert, you do know a very special magic technique, one that will get Ferdinand perked up in no time. Remember?
Sylvain pointed out, a sly lilt curling his tone. Hubert could practically hear the damn wink in his voice. "Your advice would be significantly more helpful if your words were not so crypt." Hubert's angry shout came to an abrupt halt. His stomach somersaulted, and fire engulfed his face. Images flooded his mind of himself, twirling to the cadence of the chimes jingling at his belt, of electric waves of primal magic shimmering along his nerves, as his limbs flowed to the rhythmic twang of bangles fluttering with his liquid movements, and of Hubert's hips and rear canting with exaggerated thrusts, a sultry, wanton display in a poorly timed and monumentally brainless attempt to seduce Ferdinand on the battlefield, the memory of the mortifying incident alone enough to make Hubert die a little bit on the inside. Hubert gulped, peered around the pillar. The beast lumbered by on all fours, drawn by Hubert's shouts, the metal panels on the floor rattling with each step it took. It paused on just the other side of the pillar, rearing back on its hind legs and lifting its massive head to sniff the air. Hubert gulped and ducked behind the pillar. "You can't seriously be suggesting—" he hissed at Sylvain. Hubert cringed and froze when the beast whirled in his direction again.
"Get those Vestra hips sashaying again? You bet I am!"
Sylvain chirped.
"Now, dance like your life depends on it, because at the moment, it kind of fucking does!"
Hubert's face could not decide whether to burst into flames or drain into chalky pallor. His stomach performed another series of acrobatic tumbles at Sylvain's suggestion. Howls ripped through the arena, followed by the grating screech of the behemoth's clawed gauntlets, scrabbling against the metal walls in an attempt to reach Sylvain and Ingrid. The monster leapt into the air in a failed attempt to reach the observation deck. More shrieks of torn metal screamed through the room as the beast landed with enough force to dent the metal paneling beneath its feet. Hubert cringed at the sight and sounds. He fired an irate glare up at Sylvain. "Ignoring the fact that this is likely one of the most idiotic ideas you have ever concocted, pray tell, Sylvain, how exactly am I supposed to successfully complete a ritual for dancer magic with that monstrosity lumbering about the field?" Hubert snarled.
"Don't sweat it. We got you guys covered. Ingrid and I will launch some fire at the big bastard to keep him busy while you dance up a storm."
Sylvain is right, Hubert, and I certainly would not object to a repeat performance. Ferdinand smiled coyly, his gaze raking up and down Hubert's body with heated interest. Almost immediately, a scalding blush washed across his face, and he forced his gaze away from Hubert with an awkward cough and a shy smile. "Very well," Hubert grumbled, as the flames licked across his face, staining his pale skin a dark crimson. He launched a molten glare up at Sylvain and shouted, "If I end up being crushed to death by that behemoth while performing a hip twist, then mark my words, Gautier. My enraged spectre will rise from the grave and turn your life into a walking nightmare."
Yeah, your pissy ghost will haunt my ass for all eternity if this goes sideways. Got it. Now get your ass moving.
Hubert swallowed heavily as he stepped just far away enough from the pillar to give himself space to dance, face ducked and swaths of hair hanging over his eyes. Shyly, he lifted his head to meet Ferdinand's gaze. The Holy Knight nodded to him with an encouraging smile. Carefully, he tapped his foot on the ground, quiet enough so as not to attract the monster, while still creating a strong enough beat Hubert could attune his body and magic to. It was difficult to find the right rhythm without the chimes on the dancer uniform belt to guide him, but after a few tries, he began to feel the first trickles of the primal dancer magic prickling the edges of his nerves. He swayed his hips to the tempo rippling along his body, remembering Dorothea's advice about softening his knees and loosening his muscles to allow the movements to flow like liquid.
Oh, come on! Really? Now?
Sylvain's voice screeched through the room. The buzz of warp spells rattled like static through the amplifier, joined by a chorus of chortles and whispered incantations. Another squawk of dark mages had materialized in the observation deck.
Here, take the fire orb before you pass up from casting. I'll deal with them.
Ingrid shouted back, the Falcon Knight's battle cry followed by the clash of Lune, tearing through the fiends. Explosions of dark magic and frenzied shouts reverberated through the arena. Bolts of violet and crimson flashed from the observation deck in an ominous swirl of blinding lights. The massive beast whirled, its head whirling around as noise bombarded it from all directions. It bounced around the field like an enraged bull, smashing its armored head through one of the pillars near the observation deck. Hubert startled from his dance motions, the gathered waves, primal magic slipping from his fingertips as he lost track of his own cadence. He took a deep breath and began again, first by tapping his foot to establish the rhythm, then by swaying his hips to its cadence. Thrums of pulsing mana quickly sparked along his nerves once more. Tingles danced along his skin as the ancient magic surged within him once more. Hubert began tracing his feet along the floor in the pattern of an infinity loop. The movements were more clumsy wearing the heavy boots instead of the bare feet or sandals he had used in the past. Yet the dancer magic continued to pool within him, electrical currents of elemental power that swirled together in a pulsing whirlpool. His arms joined the routine next, swaying like blades of grass caught in a gentle breeze, hypnotic and delicate in their fluidity. His shoulders rolled to the gentle cadence as his feet glided across the floor. The magic built to a crescendo as he finished the infinity loop with a final sway of his hips. With one last spin, Hubert poured the swirling pools of rose-tinted mana directly into Ferdinand. The Holy Knight sighed with relief as the dancer magic washed over him. Within seconds, color began to return to his cheeks, and the lines that cragged his face no longer seemed so deep. Ferdinand straightened his posture, stepping away from the pillar, and flashed a radiant smile at Hubert. "Magnificent," Ferdinand breathed, as he regarded Hubert with eyes filled with pure warmth, as if Hubert were the most beautiful sight he had ever encountered. He reached up to caress the sharp bone of Hubert's cheek. "Truly, a divine sight you are." "Yes, well, as long as you are feeling better." Hubert choked, his gaze drifting to the ground as fire blazed across his cheeks. "Now, our best course of action is for me to melt the beast's armored hide with mire first, before attempting a frontal assault. That spell will take time to cast, and you will be vulnerable to an attack while doing so. As you said, Sylvain will not be able to divert that beast's attention forever." Ferdinand frowned as his eyes flicked up to the observation deck, where Sylvain's fire attacks had greatly diminished in frequency. The Holy Knight straightened his posture and readied his lance. Much of the fatigue that had clung to him earlier washed away. Jaw set, and eyes blazing like embers, Ferdinand met Hubert's gaze with a resolve forged of iron. "In that case, allow me to distract the beast while you conjure the spell." "Absolutely not," Hubert growled, as a surge of ice water flooded his gut. The revitalization magic may have restored a fraction of your strength, but you are still in no shape to be weaving and dodging between the claws of that beast. Such little faith you have in my abilities, Hubert, Ferdinand teased with a weak chuckle. I must say, I am a touch offended. A roar blasted through the room, accompanied by the shrill scrape of claws against stone. Both noises far too close to the two men ducked behind the far pillar. Hubert glanced over his shoulder, noting grimly that Sylvain had dropped to one knee, leaning heavily on the arrow of Indra for balance. The wilted flame in the fire orb sputtered as the last reserves of its energy drained away. It would not be long before the colossal beast lost interest in the weakened paladin out of reach, and redirected its attention to its prey hiding in the shadows. This is far from the time for foolish heroics, Hubert snapped. The strength of that creature is far beyond anything we have ever faced. I will not lose you, Hubert. Ferdinand cut in sharply. The humor vanished from his face. Let me do this. The knotted coils of Hubert's innards twisted, and the claws in his chest squeezed at his heart and lungs. But Hubert knew there would be no deterring Ferdinand once his mind was made up about something. A true paragon of chivalry and bull-headed stubbornness. As infuriating as it could be at times, it was part of why Hubert loved him. Very well, Hubert conceded with a heavy sigh. But please, do not take any unnecessary risks. Not now. When I just... Ferdinand hooked a gentle hand behind Hubert's head and drew him close, pressing their foreheads together. Hubert stuttered at the touch, a lump forming in his chest. I promise. I will stay safe, and that we will both make it out of here alive, my love. Ferdinand vowed. He pulled away, just enough to stare Hubert straight in the eyes. I give you my word. With those words, Ferdinand drew him in for another kiss. That touch of lips tender, gentle this time, a soft caress compared to the impassioned kisses they shared earlier. Warmth and love poured into every ounce of the kiss. Then you had best keep it, Hubert breathed as they separated, pressure stinging at his eyes and sharp barbs slicing at his chest. A noble such as I breaking such an important vow? Perish the thought! Ferdinand grinned, and gave Hubert one last peck on the cheek. Reluctantly, Hubert let go of the other man as he stepped away. Taking a deep breath, Ferdinand readied his broken lance and dashed out into the arena. Hubert readied his tome, the first words of the mire incantation already spinning from his lips. The beast growled and whipped around as it heard Ferdinand approach. Ferdinand charged the monster with a mighty roar, a slight limp to his steps, but fire blazing across his face. Emerald flashed around him as the crest of Keyhole surged to life. A mighty paw encased in spiked metal slashed out at Ferdinand. Hubert's heart skipped a beat, his words faltering for a moment as Ferdinand narrowly rolled under the attack, placing himself closer to the monster. Ferdinand countered by stabbing up at the unarmored underside of the behemoth's arm.
She's broken through every line of our defenses! The rest of you, get out there now! Stop her!
Odysseus shrieked through the amplifier. Acid droplets materialized out of the air and fused into large bubbles of violet, corrosive sludge that hovered over the monster. The caustic scent seared Hubert's nostrils. Fatigue clung to his bones like honey as the spell drained the last of his magic reserves. Hubert gnashed his teeth and hissed the final words. "Get clear!" Hubert screamed at Ferdinand as the incantation finished, as the last droplets of acid merged into the bubbles. Ferdinand scrambled out of the way, just as the beast smashed down its armored paw on the spot the Holy Knight had been standing seconds earlier, leaving a massive dent in the floor beneath. Dollops of acid sludge poured over the beast, coating the monster's thick scales and armored plating in corrosive goop. The beast shrieked, clawing at its own face and back with its gauntleted paws. Fissures of steam flitted through the air from where the acid had chewed through the monster's scales and armor. Sloths of mire rolled down the beast's neck, melting the many eyes embedded into its flesh. Blinded and writhing in agony, the beast thrashed. It smashed its massive gauntlets into the ground and rammed its head against the nearby pillar. Tremors shook the arena with every mighty strike. The corroded helm crumbled and fell away from the beast, exposing its unprotected head. Ferdinand used the opening to rush forward and drive what was left of his lance through its skull. The blade struck true, sinking into the flesh. A smile of triumph lit Ferdinand's face as he twisted the lance, driving it further. "Quite the team we make," Ferdinand grinned as he rammed the lance deeper, and the monster shrieked, an unstoppable duo of martial prowess, shining together on the battlefield like a pair of Ferdinand's words were cut short as the beast swung its paw and swatted the Holy Knight. Hubert cried out in horror as he watched Ferdinand be sent sprawling across the arena floor. The Holy Knight whimpered, struggling to get his limbs underneath himself before collapsing with a pained cry. The beast roared and shambled forward, Ferdinand's lance still embedded within its skull. Hubert screamed the words for a dark-spike spell, bolts of pain searing through his veins. Weak puffs of purple light flickered into existence for a second before being snuffed out like a delicate candle flame. Snarling, Hubert attempted another spell, mire this time. A handful of droplets sprung to life and hovered over the beast, only to evaporate into harmless mist seconds later. A helpless scream ripped through Hubert's throat as he watched the spell wither and die. His magic reserves were nearly depleted. Even with a tome, he did not have the energy to cast another spell. Ferdinand crawled on the ground, painfully dragging himself towards a nearby pillar. Just behind him, the blind beast sniffed the air, in search of the one who had stabbed it. Another pained grunt from Ferdinand alerted the monster to his location, the massive head swiveling towards the wounded Holy Knight, globs of drool dripping from its colossal fangs as its maw opened in a malevolent grin. Without his magic, Hubert snarled and began hurling the remainder of his knives at the monster to divert its attention. The blades bounced harmlessly off the thick hide, despite the corrosion, the beast barely flicking its attention towards the mage, its focus entirely on Ferdinand. Talons of ice gripped Hubert's heart as he threw his last blade and screamed, the behemoth paying him no mind. "No, no, no, it can't end like this. Not here, not now."
"Hubert!"
Sylvain shouted from the observation deck.
"Use this!"
Hubert looked up to see the arrow of Indra being tossed out the broken window and into the arena. The weapon hit the ground with a loud clatter, the shimmering of magic-infused sparks still flickering along its blade. The mage dove for the spear, readying the weapon in his hands and turning to face the monster. Without hesitation, Hubert steeled himself and charged at the monster. The last tendrils of magic energy thrummed through Hubert, ignited by the lance clutched in his hand. Ice wove along the blade with tendrils of frost. Hubert blinked at the sight, the cold touch of mana surging through him. Ice was a branch of magic he did not delve into often, but it was the one that answered readily to the magic artifact in his hand. With a roared battle cry, Hubert swept the arrow of Indra in a wide arc, using the last of his magic energy to unleash the gathered wave of ice magic. Glacial stalagmites burst from the ground, piercing the monster's underbelly and freezing its limbs in blocks of ice. The beast growled and tried to rip its limbs free, but to no avail. Hubert used the opening to dive forward and drive the lance into the monster's head. An agonized howl rang through the field as the monster feebly thrashed on the ground. Hubert snarled and drove the lance deeper, twisting the blade and carving open the monster's skull. Finally, it slumped to the ground, dead at last. Hubert gasped, doubled over, and still clinging to the lance. Rivets of perspiration poured from his face and soaked his bangs. With a heaving gasp, Hubert grasped the arrow of Indra and ripped the weapon free from the beast's skull.
"Damn! Where did that attack come from? Have you been holding out, Hubert?"
Sylvain's voice chuckled through the room. "That was most impressive." Ferdinand grinned as he scrabbled at the pillar and staggered to his feet, shuffling towards Hubert with a bright grin. "And here you insisted that wielding a lance was outside your repertoire of skills. Perhaps the professor was right to suggest that branch of training after all."
"Wait! No, no, no! Lord Dallas will not be pleased!"
From the other observation deck, Odysseus' screeching was cut off by the slash of an axe and Edelgard's enraged snarl. After a few seconds, the doors to the arena screeched open. Moments later, Edelgard rushed through the open doors. Much of the gold plating protecting her was scratched and caked in dark blood, her shield abandoned. Heavy armor clinked as she sprinted towards the two men. "Good, you're both safe. I feared I wouldn't be able to open those doors in time. I lost count of the amount of times I was ambushed on my way to the other observation room." Edelgard panted, a sorrowful frown crinkling her brow. "You have nothing to apologize for, Your Majesty." Hubert smiled. "Had you not stopped those foes, there's no telling what monstrosities they would unleash on us and our companions next." "Edelgard, I must admit, I did not expect you to take part in the rescue mission yourself." Ferdinand smirked as he limped forward. Edelgard rolled her eyes at the comment and scowled at her general. "You are absolutely— Of course I came to find you," she snapped. "As much as your incessant need to compete with me at all times drives me up the wall. You truly are one of my dearest friends." "Really?" Ferdinand blinked in surprise. "Truly? I had no idea you held me in such high esteem." Ferdinand's words were cut off by Edelgard wrapping him in a tight hug that had the holy knight wheezing for air. He smiled and returned the embrace. "By the way, Hubert," Edelgard added, as she stepped away from Ferdinand. She reached into her pocket and held out a glittering object. "I believe you may have dropped this. I saw Matilda hand it to you earlier." Hubert's eyes lit up as he took sight of the Morphisi warp gem held in Edelgard's palm. "I cannot believe I was so foolish as to let this slip from my pocket." Hubert snarled at himself. He accepted the gem with a warm smile and a nod of gratitude. "You have my thanks. I apologize for my clumsiness. Much of this debacle in the arena could have likely been avoided had I not dropped such a vital tool in my haste." "Well, we can't exactly blame you. Not when the man you love is about to be torn to shreds by a horde of monsters." Sylvain hummed in amusement as he and Ingrid made their way across the arena and joined the others. His eyes drifted to the slain monster, letting out a low whistle as he took in the carnage. "Remind me not to get on your bad side, Hubie." Sylvain grinned. "Given that the threats of bodily harm I have issued have never been a deterrent in the past, I can't imagine you altering your behavior any time soon." Hubert chuckled. "Fair enough."
"Hey, is this how those weirdos use this thing?"
Caspar's voice rang out over the arena. Hubert and the others stared up, blinking in confusion. He looked to the observation decks and frowned when he noticed both rooms were still empty. "Caspar," Hubert hollered back, "are you speaking to us from the control room?"
"Wait, Hubert? You can actually hear me? Wow, that's amazing!"
Caspar cheered through the amplifier.
"See? I told you it would work!"
Bernadetta's voice snipped.
"Those creepy mages were using it to speak to each other from different rooms across the base."
"Incredible. A means of long-distance communication. I wonder what kind of range such a device has."
Linhart mused.
"Wait, is that Hubert's voice? Let me talk to him,"
came Matilda's muffled voice, quickly followed by the sound of footsteps echoing through the amplifier.
"Hubert, are you there? Did you find Ferdinand?"
Her voice sounded again, much louder this time. "He did indeed," Ferdinand answered with a warm grin aimed at Hubert. "He was most valiant and brave, facing off against 3 different demonic beasts to come to my aid. A feat fit for the greatest of legends. Though I must say, I am surprised he allowed you to accompany him on such a dangerous mission." "I was hardly given a choice," Hubert muttered. "And she has done remarkably well and proven herself quite a bit with this mission, Hubert," Edelgard added with a wry smile. "Theodore as well."
"Well, thank the flames you are safe, Ferdinand. I dread to think about what miserable state my brother would be in had something happened to you."
"I am in good health as well, in case you wanted to know," Hubert chuckled.
Yes, we all know you have the tenacity of a cockroach."
She snorted.
"Oh, good. This will save the hassle of sending someone to go find all of you,"
Linhart commented dryly.
"And it's a good thing you found Ferdinand, because I'm afraid we're all out of time."
Hubert and the others stared blankly at each other as a beat of silence fell over them. "I beg your pardon?" Hubert frowned.
"Well, you see, there has been a bit of a development since you left to find Ferdinand."
"Linhart, what exactly is your status?" Edelgard bristled.
"The good news is we managed to defeat all the attacking dark mages and hold the control room without suffering any casualties."
Linhardt explained. And the bad news? Edelgard glowered, her armored boot tapping against the floor.
Well, about that. Lynn, it's getting brighter. I can see that, Caspar.
Hey, Linhardt, kind of freaking us out, man. Want to fill us in on what's going on? Sylvain gulped.
As I was saying, we suffered no losses while defending the control room, but 2 of the Dark Mages managed to breach our defensive line. Felix and Matilda were able to eliminate them before too much harm was caused. But I'm afraid these fiends managed to tamper with one of the devices. A great deal of magical energy is surging through them and causing an instability.
Linhardt, please get to the point, Edelgard snapped.
Yes. Well, my point is you should probably return here quickly. I believe this fortress is about to explode.
Silence fell over the group at Linhardt's blunt words. I apologize, Linhardt. Hubert gulped. Perhaps it is the quality of these devices, but I could have sworn I heard you just say that the fortress was about to explode.
Yes, Hubert, I did say that.
The healer snipped.
I have other words and phrases I can use to describe the situation if you prefer. Blown to pieces, bursting into a ball of hellfire, shredded like festival paper in a hail of shrapnel. I can keep going if you like.
Fine, Hubert hissed. Evacuate everyone else through the portal, and tell them to regroup at the rendezvous point. And make sure to send a signal to Petra and the others so they can fly clear of the mountain. We'll meet you on the outside.
Don't take too long. I don't think the magical energy from these devices will remain stable for long.
Linhardt's words lacked their usual sarcastic bite, every syllable wavering with an undercurrent of worry.
Now, if I can only bring this device with me for further study. Caspar, could you give me a hand? You got it!
Clinks and crunches of metal scraping against metal, woven with Caspar's grunts, rattled through the amplifier, before the voices went abruptly silent. The quiet folded over them in a suffocating blanket, their only tether to the rest of their companions cut off. It took us a while to get from the control room to here. Are we going to make it there on time? Ingrid frowned. We don't need to. Not with this, Hubert said firmly, as he held out the warp, the magic-infused jewel glowing and pulsing whirlpools of contained mana. Will that be able to transport all 5 of us? I only recall using those gems to work 2 people at a time. Ferdinand frowned, as his eyes flickered between Hubert and the gem in his palm. It will work, Hubert growled with determination, as his fist closed around the gem. It must. The 5 of them huddled together, each one holding on to the people next to them, creating a chain of linked arms. Hubert took a deep breath and focused his attention on the glowing gem clutched in his fist. He pictured in his head the force surrounding the mountain, the rendezvous point where his companions were waiting. Rays of scarlet seeped between Hubert's fingers as the gem flared to life. It was not long before the lights bloomed and engulfed the group in a cocoon of red shimmers. Like before, a moment of weightlessness enveloped him. Seconds later, the swirling red glow dissipated, revealing the familiar force surrounding him. Hubert blinked as dim rays of light flooded his vision. Rustles of tree branches fluttered through the wind in a soothing cadence. The scent of pine and blossom, carried on the breeze, mingled with the earthy smell of dried mud, filled his nose. He breathed in the aroma with a blissful sigh. The simple scents were luxurious against his senses after hours of traversing stale corridors of sanitized metal. Relief flooded his body as he took note. Ferdinand, Sylvain, Edelgard, and Ingrid were all present alongside him. All of them blinked at the weak sunlight peeking through the clouds and washing over them. Ferdinand and Sylvain wept with joy, clinging to each other as they drank in the sights around them. The group turned to see a handful of their companions hovering nearby. "They're here!" Bernadetta cheered as she bounced on her feet and raced towards them. "Bertie!" Both of Hubert's siblings cried out as they sprinted forward, nearly tackling Hubert to the ground with their hugs, latching onto his torso like a pair of dark-haired barnacles. Hubert chuckled and tightly held them back. A crackle of splintered rock cut through the joyous reunion. Hubert's head whipped in the direction of the noise, his eyes growing wide. Fissures rippled through the rock face like cracks in aged glass. A loud hum vibrated from deep within the mountain. Magic energy soaked the air in a choking smog, causing Hubert and the others to gag at its intensity.
Come on, come on! We need to get out of here!
Bernadetta shouted, her body shaking as she waved to her companions.
The others are further in the forest waiting for us!
Hubert and the others nodded, and raced after the archer without another word. Ferdinand's arm was looped around his shoulder as they made their way through the woods. The Holy Knight grunted and clenched his teeth, his features crumpled with agony, but managed to keep his feet moving. It was not long before they reached the others. The decoy team was among their numbers as well. Even Duchess and Buttercup were with the group, the Pegasus and Wyvern having been corralled to the meeting spot by Petra and Constance. Relieved smiles lit everyone's faces as Hubert and the others rejoined them. The earth began to shake around them. Steam burst from the fissures, branching through the mountain, the eerie glow of neon pulsing beneath their depths. Cascades of rock rattled loose from the mountain, crashing into the earth far below. "Everybody, get clear!" Shamir shouted as she waved to everyone to take cover. All members of the rescue squad ducked into the trees, peering at the shaking mountain from a safe distance. The glowing lights pulsating from the fissures flared into a blinding corona that engulfed the entire mountain. Suddenly, a shift in magic rippled through the air, and a deafening explosion roared through the sky. Hubert ducked, his arm draped protectively over Ferdinand, as they dropped to the ground. Stone rained down on the forest, pelting the ground like thick chunks of hail. The thick smog of magic that had filled the air snuffed out. Their distance from the mountain, coupled with the branches hanging overhead, shielded the group from most of the debris. Eventually, the dust settled, washed away by the winds. Hubert lifted his head and peered through trees. When the dust finally cleared, the mountain was gone, the sprawling fortress and its many dark corridors and devices reduced to rubble. All of it no more than a pile of broken rocks. A gaping chasm of scorched earth was all that remained.